Alrighty. Logan, will you offer an opening prayer for us, please?
Sorry, that was it. Say that again.
Okay, Logan would offer an opening prayer.
Okay, I'm going.
Okay.
Our Father in heaven, we come before thee at this time and give our gratitude for the opportunity we have to meet as a group. Father, we ask that we may have thy spirit with us and that we may be able to learn more together. And we pray for this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So we are discussing the Columbia's final mission case. And this case pretty much just frustrated me more and more the further I read into it. But basically, a quick synopsis. They start off, introducing the, NASA, how it was formed. We first sent a man into space in '61, and then they vowed to put a man on the moon. I think Kennedy was it. They put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and barely made it by making it in '69. And then they talked about a few different incidents that happened. The first one they mentioned were the O-rings, where it was colder that day, and they had been warned that something might be an issue, but they went ahead anyways, and there was a fire. And then that was the Challenger. And then they went on to talk about how they started the shuttle program, and they developed the Columbia, and they went into kind of the details of that mission and how in order to start the whole shuttle program, they had to get funding from all these places, and they had these really strict regulations and had to make sure that everything was, kind of up to spec because, Department of Defense is funding them, the nation is funding them, so they had to have everything really as it was supposed to be. Finally, Columbia's mission comes, and they start losing foam, which previously had been considered a big issue, and just kind of happened more and more, so they got more lenient on it. And anyways, they lost a big chunk, so they set up a division to kind of work on it and pretty much just ignored them. They said, okay, we're going to do this because we're supposed to and make you guys work on it, but not listen to anything you guys say. Kind of just got from it. And,
Okay.
and we kept trying to warn them. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, all right.
Okay.
Sort of.
So yeah, lots of miscommunication in there. And then Columbia comes back in and ends up, disintegrating and falling apart. And it's a very tragic ending for the space shuttle.
So with the Challenger, I actually found a video of it on YouTube.
Uh-huh.
It exploded.
It what?
It exploded.
Oh, it exploded. I thought in the case it just said it caught on fire.
Which one, Challenger or Columbia?
The
Columbia
first
exploded, I thought. The Challenger was where I thought it. The Challenger said just caught on fire. I didn't know it exploded.
So
Yeah,
the
no,
Challenger
it
exploded. Columbia caught on fire.
So basically, Columbia, when it was coming into atmosphere, it had the hole in it, and so super gases and basically plasma just flooded into the wing, and then from there it pretty much exploded.
Gotcha.
Except if I remember correctly, it didn't really explode more as it just completely fell apart. But what I was saying is when I was watching the video on the Challenger, like it was like it was a minute and a half YouTube clip, maybe 2 minutes. And
yeah, Challenger was full on just explosion.
It exploded. I was like, I didn't understand what it meant when hydrogen and oxidized, the technical terms, what happened. And then when I watched it, I'm just like, yeah, it would just been easier if you said the thing exploded.
Yeah. Crazy.
Okay. Sorry, I just thought it was funny. You look it up online on YouTube, you can watch it.
Yeah, there's a good documentary on the Columbia.
yeah?
A National Geographic one. I found that on YouTube and was watching that when I was writing my case study. And kind of over all the details of it, and talks a lot about like what basically it reiterates a lot of what we read about, but it also gives some insight into other things that I might talk about later.
Okay, so that's kind of, a real very brief synopsis. Because 7 months after the Columbia accident, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board presented the reports on the causes of the accident. The board pinpointed the technical cause of the accident. It also identified organizational issues with NASA dating back decades. The CAIB also reported how manager might have behaved differently during the mission and stressed the organizational shortcomings at NASA that contributed to the catastrophe. Okay, so what are kind of some of the facts that we know?
What do you mean by what type of facts?
The facts of, the case. Okay, the first issue was the O-rings. And they were worn, let's see. I'm trying to find it in the case now.
So if we really want to think when the first issue happened, that was back in the Apollo, during the Apollo missions, when they didn't really have a huge safety board, and then Congress basically told them to get one.
Yes, and that's when, which mission was it where they formed the Tiger team?
That was shortly after the Apollo mission, I think.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. But
they had a real crisis on their hands. And so during that crisis, they formed the Tiger team to be able to handle that issue. And then afterwards, Congress told them to beef up their security, form better protocols. And so they initiated, essentially, they put in place certain protocols and that's kind of the problem with Columbia, is the fact that their protocols dictated that they should have formed a Tiger team, but they didn't. They formed the DAT instead. And there's several problems with that, namely that, like, for one, a Tiger team has direct authority. Basically, they can they respond directly to like the MMT, whereas the DAT didn't have any clear lines of authority. And basically, when they would offer their opinions and stuff, they were ignored and shot down.
Yeah.
But the biggest issue, the start of all the communication errors started when they lost favor with the American government, and they had to start going outside the box for money issues. Because they didn't have the funding necessary to do half of what they wanted. And instead of changing to the needs of what they needed to do, like downsize and find workarounds, they just ignored any problems that would cost any money. Which, I mean, that was showed when when they were first coming up with the designs of the shuttle, like how they were supposed to do testing before, and instead they went straight to models and used analytic models and other things instead of actually testing it out. They were doing it by theories, and everyone involved was literally testing theoretical, experimental stuff. And didn't help that the DoD got involved with the shuttle, making it a lot more complicated than it needed to be.
Yes. Okay.
All right, turn off the video because my wife was being distracted in the background.
I'm cleaning.
Can you say so?
I'm only second.
You can smack me if you want.
We are recording, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
I'd like to put that out. I am just cleaning the kitchen.
Okay, so
Usually,
issues. Like, what are the main things to discuss? Main issues with the case. What's the root problem?
The organization started caring more about money and anything that make it more expensive to operate, they basically saw it as a foreseeable loss. So anything that would make their cost of operating higher, they ignored.
Mm-hmm.
So such things such as safety was something that was an acceptable risk to them. It's just
Yeah, I think the huge amount of cutting costs caused a huge issue. Like even for example, like those cameras that couldn't see everything. It was like, what's the point of them? You can't see outside of every inch of where you're outside. You can't go out. It's like, I don't know. They cut costs where they shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And like the shuttle itself was out of date when they were still using it to send missions.
Yeah.
I think it was out of date, but was it past? Had it run more than it was designed to run, or was it just an older model? Because I think with regards to that, it's
more than it was supposed to.
Well, I mean, it was definitely like they were putting it up a lot more than they were supposed to, but I think that had more to do with like maintenance issues and things like that. Kind of again going back to what you guys are saying about cutting corners. But I think it was still a good model. Like the difference being between like, you know, is it expired essentially, or is it just an older?
I think it was just taking place at a time where there were a lot of advances happening, and so it was 10 years ago, and so it's like looking at the original iPhone versus the iPhone that just came out today.
Yeah.
So the other one still works, but it's just out of date.
Yeah.
But the
other
thing is that,
or just like the culture, and then shoot, what was the other thing I was gonna say? Oh, just the demanding schedule. Just they had too much booked, and so that they were trying to. That kind of goes back to what you guys were saying, but also just like the fact that like they're just trying to put it up too quick. Didn't have time to do anything.
Well, they're also making poor economic decisions as well. Like they had to subsidize a lot because of competition. So, like they had to implement that. They put the shuttle in space a lot more than it needed to be, and like and the system they were using was out of date as well with the foam rockets. Like they didn't know what was causing those damages. They didn't know why it was happening. And so because they didn't know those two things, and so instead of coming up with something better, something that would protect the shuttle, they ignored that evidence, said it was an acceptable risk, and put the danger rating down within safety parameters.
If I remember correctly, there was actually someone that was like, "This is too big of a risk to do it," but that since like everyone else wasn't on board with what he was saying, they kind of shut him out. I read it on Monday.
Well, at that point, all of the NASA officials, they would get statements from their engineers. They would see safety ratings and problems and issues, and they would ignore them because they know that they couldn't afford not to do it.
Well, so there's a few things with that though. So is there a section specifically on the foam strike, Amanda, that we're going to talk about, or?
No, it's just
like,
initially we're talking about the issues, and then we're going to go into more human bias.
Because one thing that kind of like helped me when I was like studying through this was like realizing the background of like the foam strike, and it kind of adds it makes the picture a little grayer. Because for us, it's easy for us to sit on the armchair and go, yeah, they're really stupid for not taking care of this problem sooner. But so first of all, like the foam strike, it comes from you have the main body, the main rocket, and you have the two boosters on the side, and they have like, as well as the shuttle attached to it. And all these attachments are, you know, like metal and wiring rods and things like that they need to protect. And so they put a piece of big like foam board essentially over it to cover it, to protect it during launch and everything, that debris, nothing hits those critical things. That would be really bad if like the the arm holding on the shuttle to the booster was broken off because of something. So they have these foam boxes essentially that they put over that stuff. And what they found was that actually most of the time, these on the left side, it would fall off the arm, and it would usually just fall off into nothing. Well, or it would hit the ship, but it wasn't a big significant piece. It wasn't like the whole thing was falling off; just little chunks of foam board were falling off. But the problem, and they only found that it was only on the left side. The right side wouldn't do it for some reason. They couldn't really figure that out. Anyway, the issue is like this happened like every single time. It said something like 89% of the launches that they've had a foam strike incident.
Yeah.
But the and so for them, you know, they were trying to figure it out, but it was something that they couldn't really figure out. And so they're just like, this happens every time. We haven't had an issue yet. And so just continually kept on getting downgraded in issues. Now, of course, this is a problem, and like their initial protocols stated that they should have been grounded until they figured out and solved the problem. And that was part of my thesis or whatever, was that you need to stop everything until you figure this out. But like this happened most of the time. The main difference between this strike and other strikes was the size and the placement of the hit. Because like in the video with the National Geographic, like they did a test on one of the plates, because you know it's got several plates along the RCC panels, or several. It's kind of like scales on a serpent or whatever. They tested on one of the plates. They hit with the exact same size foam board that the Columbia got hit with, like the same speed, same size. They hit the 6th plate, and it just scratched it. But they hit the 8th plate, which is what Columbia got, where it got hit, and it punched a hole in it. And that was the problem. And so, like, while it's like obviously they were in the wrong for not like dealing with this issue sooner and giving it the due diligence, they, to a certain extent, you understand a little bit why they were justified, because 89% of the time this happened, hit, no big deal. We just need to fix it on the ground afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest issue is there was risk assessments that they did and that they ignored. And the biggest issue that I had with what they did was they had a lot more resources available that they could have used to assess the situation, and they ignored it.
And that's
like I even read I read some reports where they could have, like the military was willing to send one of their suborbital U-2s, the spy planes of the time, to get better pictures of the Columbia.
The issues on the rocket ship.
Yeah. And so, I mean, a lot of people, they just were looking for quick information so that they could bring it back home so that they could send it on its next mission.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're just trying to, they went to the, if I remember correctly, they went to the DAT again, check to see if there's any problems, and all the simulations that they ran based off the information they had, there was going to be no catastrophic damage.
Mm-hmm.
But
no, actually, it said there was going to be significant damage, like catastrophic damage, but because somebody did it that was like not senior, and like because it always was dramatic, essentially, they just like ignored it.
Well,
it's like, oh, it always says that it's death, but it never is.
Oh, from what I read, they said that there would be significant damage. It would still basically it would be catastrophic, is what they made it.
Oh, okay. You might be right on that.
Not everyone dying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm imagining both parts that you guys are mentioning. I'm trying to find it in the case right now.
And like,
if I remember correctly, it was on page. It was on day one of the days. I think it might have been 5 through 7.
Yeah, I'm looking in
there. Yeah, and don't get me wrong. Like my answer is that like definitely the problem is how they handled this, and that they didn't use the resources, and they were ignoring the problems involved. I'm just laying out the groundwork for what happened in like understanding some of their justification, but they definitely were negligent in this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to kind of change gears a bit, what is human bias?
Is that part of the reading?
So it says cognitive biases are systematic errors in judgment. Confirmation bias is our tendency to look for information that confirms our existing views. And sunk cost bias is our tendency to escalate commitment to a course of action into which we've already invested time, money, or other resources.
Yeah. Okay, so if I'm understanding, depending on, so the type of biases that NASA did was they were looking for things that they were looking for results that they wanted. And so they were looking for information that would match those results. Mm-hmm. So if an engineer would say there's an issue with this, they would find another engineer that said, well, he's kind of right, but he's not. And you're right and you're fine. So they would find people to confirm that the confirmation bias, finding people to agree with their point of view so that they wouldn't have to dish out money to fix a problem.
So definitely confirmation bias, and then that last bias you mentioned, Ham specifically.
The sunk cost, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I remember there's a quote in their case specifically where she says, you know, they're already up there. There's nothing we can do now.
Well, that, and also she had invested her efforts because the big problem in this case is her specifically, because she was on schedule for leading the next flight. And so she knew that any stoppage in this flight or any downtime or anything like that, if it got longer, that she would either be delayed or her flight would either be delayed or canceled, the one that she was going to be able to lead the next time. Mm-hmm. And so she's just awful in this case.
Yeah. What really stuck out to me and kind of frustrated me about it was they kept talking about what's the turnover time? What's the turnover time? And that seemed like that was their focus. When are we going to get the next mission out? Because these ones were working on, or these ones where they had contracted out satellites, and so they were like making missions essentially. And so their concern is when can we get the next flight and we can get the next payload out there. It wasn't, you know, okay, this is an issue, we need to stop everything and resolve it. But it was, what's the turnover time going to be? What's this going to cost us?
Can we afford another delay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that shouldn't be an issue.
Yes.
Well, no, the Russian thing was, sorry, she said facts and they were wrong. NASA was created to beat the Russians, though. That was the original thing. Cold War. Gotta love it.
Okay, so let's see. We kind of tapped on it already. But, so what evidence is present for, I think we can find something for all three of these biases: cognitive, confirmation, and sunk cost. So we already mentioned sunk cost with Pam. Confirmation, like David said, they were looking for something that, you know, answer they wanted. So cognitive bias, systematic errors in judgment.
So, okay, say that last one again.
Cognitive biases are systematic errors in judgment. How can that be found in this case?
Can you give like an example? Like systematic errors of judgment, is that like built-in errors into the system of like,
yeah, like
because the things are the way they are, we're gonna judge wrongly?
Yeah, okay, the example I was thinking of was, I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name right now, it started with an R.
Rocco?
Who was leading the DAT. Yeah, Rocha.
Oh, that
guy. He went multiple times and kind of, I mean, they weren't supposed to report directly to the MTM, they didn't really know who. And so he kind of just went and followed unofficial protocol. And I would say that would probably be a faulty judgment in his case. Because he went different times to try and get someone else to go take images or make requests that weren't official, and then ended up getting denied and costing, you know, time. Getting denied because he didn't go through the right ranks. So I would
Well,
kind of consider that.
And that kind of goes back to their culture. Like the NASA culture was they didn't want to listen to problems because like engineers couldn't actually report anything to superiors. It had to stay at their level, like their own level, which is just stupid.
Well, the thing is, if I remember correctly, the quote was, if you have a problem, prove there's a problem before you bring the problem to me.
Yeah.
Which sounds great, but sometimes it's really detrimental. You know? Because if you can't prove there's a problem until the problem happens, then it suffers from hindsight bias.
Okay. Does anyone know what shared cognitive framing is?
Not when you kind of have the same thought process as someone else, kind of same.
Yeah.
That sounds
words.
Here it says frameworks, belief, and assumptions that help us simplify a complicated reality.
Yeah.
So.
Isn't that it hasn't happened yet, so it's not going to happen?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that.
Because that's the case.
That's kind of,
David, can you repeat what you said?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I said, could that be like, it hasn't happened yet, so it's not going to happen?
Okay. Yeah.
So like with the O-rings, like, because even though it's suffered a lot of wear and tear, because we haven't had any problems with them yet at this elevation or at this temperature, it's fine. We're going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
Because
kind of like it doesn't fall on that Gaussian curve, the bell curve that we have. Like it's not there, so it's not possible to be outside of that. Very skewed thinking.
Yeah. Same thinking with the foam strike incidences too. Like even though they've happened several times and they haven't had a problem, like they still have that issue in regards to that.
The hint they gave me is neat. I hadn't thought of it that way, but they said that NASA viewed the program as an operational. So they viewed it as, an operation rather than an experimental endeavor, which it really was. So, which caused riskier decision making. And
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, isn't that? I hadn't thought about that before, but yeah, they did view it as the operation, the running business, but it was.
It's not a business; it's an experiment. I think that's kind of part of their issues. They didn't think of it as that. It's like they were closely tied with the government, and how the government, when they run things, it's like a mission, like at a military base. Like this is how it's going to happen. Like if casualties happen, they happen. But this is more of like an experiment, like in a laboratory type of thing. I've never thought of NASA like that.
So how can that thought process be seen in their judgment, in their decision making? Because they made a lot of riskier decisions. What's some of the stuff they did there?
Downplayed risks.
Yeah, but like examples from the case.
From what I understood is it's okay to take risks. It's just not okay to take unnecessary risks. They took a lot of unnecessary risks. And so, like, some of the big issues that they had was, we're going to ignore this problem because it's not a problem yet. Or, what was the question again? I lost my train of thought.
It was just seeing that they viewed it as an operation rather than an experiment. What are some of the riskier decisions that they made?
The O-rings.
Yeah.
They had an engineer. The engineer told them what was going to happen before it happened, and they rationalized it, saying that because it hasn't happened yet, that the likelihood of it happening is not very high. And so when it exploded, like it did, and the investigation basically spelled out that what happened because of what that engineer said would happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like,
go ahead.
no, I was done.
I was just gonna say, like, another riskier decision that they made was like Ham canceling the photos, because like they had already submitted the request to DoD, and then she found out about it that people were asking to get photos of Columbia in space, and she canceled those photos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was a big mistake right there.
Honestly, they kept finding ways to ignore new information.
Mm-hmm.
Because space travel, you'd think that they would welcome all information.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, if they would have been thinking of it as experimental, like they should have been, they would have, wanted to see those pictures so they could have had the evidence to help them fix it for next time.
I also think the confirmation bias kind of seeps in there too.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
There's contrary evidence that didn't support her theory, and so
It's not true.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's like me just arguing like I'm right, you're wrong, because I'm me.
Yeah.
well, she's just annoyed that they didn't do it through the proper channels, that they didn't do it through her,
Mm-hmm.
and so she squelched it.
Yeah. What got me there was when they organized the DAT, they didn't tell them who to report to.
Yeah.
And so,
Because it should have been Tiger Team from the beginning.
In that case, they should have gone to the MMC or whatever it was, but
MMT.
MMT, yeah, but they didn't. Okay, I think we've actually covered a lot of these questions through our discussion. When do the problems with the Columbia mission begin? Let's revisit that one. So
Okay.
when did the problem actually start with the Columbia mission?
Are we talking about the Columbia mission itself, or with the root problems of the Columbia mission?
Well, the Columbia mission itself, I mean, that problem started when the debris fell and hit.
But the problem. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Logan.
What?
I think if you got something, go ahead. We've talked too
I
much.
didn't say anything.
Okay, so.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we're all saying go ahead. So who's going ahead first? I got
I'll
something.
go ahead. The problem started way early on because it was systematic. They had to essentially, like, their culture had promoted people that were efficient. They had a very demanding schedule. They all had an attitude of ignoring problems rather than trying to discover solutions. All those things have been festering essentially before, and then when you actually had the problem come along, it just exposed it essentially. And with the foam strike, that was just the defining moment, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the problem started with technically formation. It was made in response to the Cold War. And the problem is that it was a political type organization, which was put forward towards the country. And the biggest issue started forming when they lost their government funding, and they had to find ways to make money, which means they compromised their scientific values for economic values. So when they changed the organization from science to trying to make money, then that's when these problems started. Now, the mission itself started having problems when they started noticing that the foam was randomly striking in areas and they didn't know the cause nor the reason or why it would do stuff. And instead of starting to figure out ways to use something else, they just ignored the issue. And then it became an issue. That's when that's where I thought the problem started. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so tell me about the people in the case. Who were the people that contributed to the failure?
Ham.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like Roka had his part to play in the fact that like he knew something was up and he wouldn't speak up. But at the same time, because the system was set up, there was a dogma against speaking. Nobody likes whistleblowers,
Mhm.
and so he was squelched and primarily indirectly many times by Ham.
So is there anything else Rocha could have done? Because he says at the end, he left that meeting feeling like they didn't understand how unsure they really were. Could he have done anything else?
Because the other thing is like, with regards to that, they were pretty slow dragging their feet. I mean, they were pretty much dragging their feet throughout the whole process, even getting started and whatnot. Like you track the requests and emails and things on the timeline back and forth, and it's kind of sad how late in the game they're essentially acting on this information.
Mm-hmm.
So he could have definitely acted a lot sooner. Should have talked to maybe other management to get the things he needed. Brought it, because if your management isn't doing the right things or whatever, you gotta deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But so he could have been more proactive, I guess, is long story short.
Okay. So what about the MMT? They're supposed to meet daily, and they met like 5 times during the 16-day mission?
Yeah.
Do you think they played a role in the failure of the mission?
Well, there's a lot of people who played roles in that the mission's failure. Like they didn't do what they're supposed to do and they should have done it, and by the time they realized there's an issue, too late.
Mm-hmm. So then, who's accountable? Is it any singular person, or is it just the whole?
I think all of them, kind of in a whole, because there's kind of little from each person in each area. So I don't think there's one specific person.
Yeah, the whole organization was flawed.
Mm-hmm. So looking at the whole organization, the MMT, the DT, the DTD, yeah, that one. And looking at what we've read this semester so far, psychological safety, team design, how can we apply what we've learned? What could they have done better? What were some of the issues?
As a leader, Ham should have definitely been more willing to listen to her subordinates and to hear outside opinions.
Overall, nobody trusted anyone else to do their job, and even if they were doing their job, they didn't trust that their job actually meant anything after certain points.
One thing that I noticed is the whole psychological safety of it. No one wanted to speak up because, I forgot who mentioned it earlier, but, the engineers, they felt, they stayed in their group. They weren't allowed to go up and talk. They weren't allowed to state their opinion, even though they're the engineers, they're the ones who are saying, hey, I figured this out, it's not going to work. They should be able to blow the horn, but they weren't allowed to. There wasn't that psychological safety. They weren't allowed to communicate, or they didn't feel comfortable doing it. Which, you know, when people's lives are in their hands like this, I feel like that's a pretty big issue.
Yeah, it's a necessity for everyone to trust everyone else to do their job in these types of situations. Like in the earlier announcement with Apollo 13, everyone worked together to solve the issue. Everyone could trust everyone else to have their back. This one, it's just like, is it going to cost us more money to save their lives? If so, can we just ignore their safety?
Mm-hmm. It goes back to the, it hasn't happened yet, so, you know, roll the dice.
Yeah, if it hasn't happened, why would it happen, right?
Mm-hmm. Like the biases. Well, we pretty much, yeah, pretty much covered it. Does anyone have any last comments or thoughts? No. Okay. Yeah, basically, I mean, what I took away from this was that I think the main issue was the teamwork. There were technical errors, technical problems, but if the team had been functioning well, then I don't want to say it could have been solved because, you know, hindsight's perfect. You can see it. I almost said 50-50. 2020, yeah. It's, you know, you can see it. We can see it sitting here knowing what's going to happen. But if you look at the evidence, yeah, it had been going for so long and it had been an issue. So on one hand, I can see their point of view and I can see how it happened and how everything slipped through the cracks. But on the other hand, you can see all the errors in the teamwork where people weren't working together, people were pulling their own agendas and just wanting to hear what they wanted to hear. And it ended up being, you know, a pretty tragic situation because of it. And I mean, it's kind of just goes to show the importance of, you know, good group dynamics, I feel like.
It really is across in that situation.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, if no one else has anything to say, then I guess we will go ahead and wrap it up.
All right.
All right.
Awesome. All right. Well, I will go ahead and post this then. And thank you, everybody.
Okay, have a good night. Have a good weekend.
Yep. See you guys next week.